Here.
Present. Here. Here.
Okay, we'll stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
This time we'll have a moment of silence. Please, we ask that you please keep the following individuals who have passed away in your thoughts and prayers. Joanne Donnelly, retired teacher assistant, Culinary Arts Program, Rogers High School. Matthew Lancaster, class of 2007. He participated in the Culinary Arts Program. Joseph Markey II, father-in-law of Nancy Markey, RHR director. Daniel Tittle, cousin of Megan Corley, TMS guidance counselor. Keisha Moore, cousin of Pell custodian William Simmons and niece of Pell custodian Vinnie Butler. Ask for a moment of silence. Thank you. Ms. Nash, do we have anybody signed up for public comment?
My name is Gretchen Catalan. My address, 128 Lawrence Street, Middletown, Rhode Island. Are you ready? Good evening. As one of 2 reading specialists at Rogers High School, I'm here to speak about the recent administrative actions that will have a direct negative impact on educational services provided to our current and future high school students. In specific, the elimination of 1 reading specialist. As a result, reading support for students will now be provided by 1 reading specialist and content area teachers. This year, the reading specialist would have had approximately 120 students in need of support. This would include 62 regular literacy students, 23 word work students, 27 ELL students, and 8 intensive special ed students. These numbers do not include P-TECH, those new to the district, and new ELLs. 1 reading specialist alone will not be able to meet the need of all of these students. And with all due respect, content area teachers are not specifically trained to address the varied needs of all struggling readers, on top of addressing core content and a myriad of other responsibilities. To realistically make this work, 62 students who read at least 1 to 2 years below grade level will no longer get intensive instruction and support from a reading specialist. It is my concern that the district is doing a huge disservice to our students. What will happen when new students enter the high school and fall 3 or more years below grade level or have IEPs? What if English is not their first language? Right now, 1 specialist will be serving approximately 60 students, thus leaving the remaining students with support from content area teachers only. What happens if those students who are only a year or 2 below grade level regress and need more intensive instruction? And what happens to those who will need the intensive support when literacy classes are full? I can tell you the reality is that these students will not get the support they need. They will fall through the cracks. Students will drop out, graduation rates will go down, and the district will have failed them. Our instructional model worked, and we had the data to support it. So why did our model change? Not because of the state regulations change, but because of money. This year, our district is over budget by $1.8 million. To help combat this, teachers and support staff took pay freezes, and while we knew this would not fix the problem, we did so to help alleviate some of the impact this would have on students. Despite the deficit, $35,000 in raises were given out to administrators. Raises that could have been used toward funding programs that students need. No one should be taking a raise with this large of a deficit, period. I am heartbroken that some of my students will not get the support they deserve because of overspending and subsequent changes. Quite frankly, I think it's time to re-examine the priorities of our district. First and foremost, our priority should be our students and their needs. Thank you.
Thank you. Was that it? No other public comment at this time? Okay. Next item, we'll move into the action items. And the first action item is 3.1, a request for approval of policy 5554, transgender, gender non-conforming, and transitioning student protocol for the second reading.
So moved. Second.
Motion has been made to approve and seconded. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor of the motion?
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Motion carries. Next action item is 3.2, request for approval of policy 5550, student discipline on the second reading, sponsored by Dr. Flowers.
So moved. Second.
Motion's been made to approve and seconded. Any discussion? Seeing no discussion, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Motion carries. Request for approval of policy number 5630, school substance abuse on the second reading.
That's what we just did. 3.4, isn't it? I'm
No,
sorry.
3.3.
I apologize. I skipped one.
Uh,
Okay,
s-
sorry.
School substance abuse policy on the second reading, sponsored by Dr. Flowers.
Move approval. Second.
Motion's been made and seconded for approval of the motion. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed?
Aye.
Item 3.4, request of approval for policy number 6397, acceptable use on the first reading, sponsored by Dr. Flowers and
This,
the
yeah,
policy subcommittee.
this is the policy of the acceptable use of the technology in the schools. And this is in line, I believe, with current practices everywhere. Everyone had a chance to look at that in their documents.
I move approval.
Second.
The motion has been made for approval and seconded. Any other discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of the motion?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Aye.
Item 3.5 is the request for approval of the food service contract renewal for 2018-2019, and Dr. Colley, I believe, is going to speak on this.
Every year, the state requires us to either go out to bid or extend the contracts for things like Chartwells. Right now, that's our vendor. We've gone through their request for extension for one more year, and the recommendation is before you.
I move approval.
Second.
Motion has been made and seconded for approval of item 3.5. Any discussion?
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Collins.
thank you. Dr. Colley, how much will the food service contract cost the Newport School District for fiscal 19?
I don't have that number right with me.
Okay, I'll be voting no if you don't have the number. Thank you.
Is it on all those documents?
Any other
It should-
discussion?
Is there any, on the documents that we got, does it say on there what the amount would be?
I don't recall seeing.
No,
another
the
figures.
documents that you have are the required documents
They don't
to
have
be
it.
sent to the state. The amounts were in the original contract signed a couple of years ago.
So it didn't increase. Give you
Whatever
the
was
numbers of 4
negotiated
years
back
ago.
then, yes.
Any other discussion? those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Nay.
Motion carries. Item 3.6, we've been asked by the Director of Human Resources to continue this motion, this action item to another meeting.
Mr. Chair, should we continue it to next month,
You could continue it.
for the next month's meeting? Okay, move to continue to the next regular meeting in September.
Second.
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded. All those in favor of the motion?
Aye.
Any opposed? Next item is 3.7, request for approval of equipment lease. Again, I think this is Dr. Colley.
I actually also have
Mr. Quinte
the Director
as well,
of
the IT director as
Technology.
well.
Our contract with vendors for the copier has expired a couple of years ago. I think we've extended it 2 years, I believe. And this year, because most of the vendors are on state or regional cooperative agreements, therefore we don't need to go out for a formal bid. We notified contractors that we knew were in these contractual arrangements, either with the state or regional entities, and we asked them to give us their best numbers. As you can see, we had two that were very close to each other. One of them suggested that they would lower their prices if the ability for us to reduce consumption, or the volume, if you will, came in a little lower. So we would like you to consider that. And if you have any questions, that's what we're here for.
So are we following the lowest bid? Are we taking the lowest bid?
Yes.
So I'm just not clear, based on the,
Toshiba.
just on the information here, which would be the bid that you'd be recommended for approval this evening?
Go ahead.
Xerox.
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 The second sheet on the bottom of the page. So that would be the one that has the first year cost of $54,180, and years 2 through 5, the cost would be $49,428.
Correct.
Mr. Chair, I move the recommendation.
Second.
Motion has been made to, in a moment. Motion's been made to approve the recommendation of the bid by CBS Xerox for the 5-year contract. Any discussion on the motion?
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Collins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Colley, where's the contract that we're voting on here? We have some summaries of specifications. You're asking us to spend tens of thousands of dollars as a school department. I have many other concerns, but for starters, where is the contract, and has our legal counsel approved? I shouldn't say approved. Has our legal counsel reviewed the contract, and does he have a recommendation regarding the contract and any changes that might need to be made with regard to the contract? I don't see anything in front of us that could justify a yes vote. I mean, we've done one thing so far tonight in voting to award a contract or an extension of a contract to the food service provider, and nobody can tell us the numbers, how much it's going to cost us. And now we're asked to vote for a bid that will cost us tens of thousands of dollars, and I don't see any contractual language in front of the school committee. We're getting ourselves back into the hole that we are currently in and that we dug for ourselves in the first place, which got us where we are. Can anyone give me a copy of the contract that we're voting on?
Well-
Mr. Galvin?
Yeah, just on one point, I've not had the opportunity to review the lease or the contract. My typical advice on these kinds of contracts are for 3-year contracts with options to renew in your favor. Very rarely, even though it's a lease situation, is there an avenue to go beyond that timeframe. I just simply haven't had any opportunity to review it to give you any direct advice.
I appreciate the answer, Mr. Galvin. Mr. Chairman, is this a 5-year contract? For Mr. Colley, I better ask Mr. Colley, since I'm sure he's more versed on this, since he does it
It's
on
a
a dated.
5-year lease. Yes, it is a 5-year contract.
Typically, when school departments, city governments, and even the state of Rhode Island signs a contract with entities, including unions, we're limited to a 3-year contract at most. Why do we feel a 5-year contract with a provider is appropriate?
We did ask Erin Mulligan, who is the purchasing agent for the city, and she said it has been approved in the past, and this would be similar to the one we currently have that was 5 years. So she did not see a problem with it. I did ask. What we're looking for is the ability to go out and put together the contract, but until we get approval for which company to go through, we wouldn't be able to put a contract together.
Why not bring it to us at that point? I mean, I'm gonna stop after I say what I'm about to say, so I don't want to prolong this discussion, but this is absurd. We're being asked to vote on things as if money grows on trees, and as if there is no matter or no substance that's important here. 5-year contract is in and of itself out of line, but the fact that Mr. Galvin, our attorney, has not had a chance to review the contract, and the members of the school committee haven't had a chance to see the details of the contract, is good enough for me to vote against it. Thank you.
Just a minute, Dr. Flowers had a hand up here first.
Thank you. I'm just looking at one of the pages that we have here, and it shows was it 5 proposals? And this one that's been recommended is by far the most economical, if you want to call it that. I like the part where it does say how to encourage the personnel to be using, like it says, less paper copies and scans in order to move people to using the technology to store data, which is, I think we all thought that we were going to have a paperless society, but it's not working that way. We still run off a few things once in a while. I'm looking at this as saying we are looking at these particular offers. Maybe I'm guessing incorrectly, but are these businesses, do they have to come under a state approval?
They're under state contracts or regional agreements, but you do not. When they do that, they actually contract for a specific price.
Okay.
However, you can always ask them to come in under that price. They can't go over, but they can come under that price, which is what we did.
So then a formal document would be generated once there is an approval?
Yes, and I will reference the regional or state agreement that is already in
Just referring
place.
back to one of the previous ones with the food service, the data was there on how much things were going to cost. I mean, if you're looking for a bottom line number, sometimes it's a little hard to tell. But when we're extending contracts, this to me is the usual procedure. Thank you, that answered my question.
Mrs. Gaines?
I just want to clarify. We are selecting a vendor in order for you to pursue a lease or a contract with that vendor.
Yes.
And that's when our lawyer would look at, approve, or go over that contract.
Yes,
So we are not approving a contract tonight.
just pursuing the vendor.
Thank you.
Mrs.
Mr.
Silver?
Chair, I think we can amend the motion to approve, subject to favorable review by Attorney Galvin.
Well, there's nothing to review. They have to develop it.
He would review it.
And then present it to you.
Is there
So-
a second to that?
I'm not sure because Ms. Nash, who made the first motion for approval of this item. Mrs. Gaines, so,
And what was the motion? To approve the vendor?
so you would have to, you could ask,
I could
Mrs.
amend
Gaines
my,
to amend her
amend my
motion.
motion to read, approve the vendor,
she has to.
Xerox as the vendor for the copier, subject to approval of a contract lease agreement.
Then we would need a second.
Okay, second.
Okay. We've had discussion, I believe there was a gentleman who put his hand up and asked to speak, so now would be the appropriate time if you'd like to. Yes, you just need to come to the podium, identify yourself for those watching on TV, and
Thank you. And thank you to the committee. And I just wanted to have a couple comments. My name is Dan Sanderson. I'm with Axions. We're the current vendor for the Newport Public School Department for office equipment, as well as the City of Newport. Have been the vendor for the Newport Public School Department for probably the last 35 years. We've managed cop machines throughout this region for a long period of time. We've been a great partner to the Newport Public School Department. If you go back over at the time when the Newport Public School Department was purchasing office equipment, we would keep those machines running at tremendous expense to us, sometimes for as long as 15 years. In the last couple of years, the last two contracts, they moved to a lease. We agreed to it, again, on our great expense to us, to renew a lease on machines that had over 2 million copies. So I think the key point here is that there's certain numbers being looked at, certain numbers being addressed. I think there's a lot of assumptions within the numbers we're presenting. We're talking about looking at volume dramatically decreasing, which is an assumption. The contract that we had prepared and I shared with Dr. Colley did include a flat level of volume over a period of time. There was no penalty. In fact, that would decrease if it went down, but it's difficult to make those assumptions. So that's what we prepared. So I look forward to an ongoing dialogue as it relates to the equipment that you're considering today. And I'd like to, if you're going to award the contract, I'd like to get an accounting of how these numbers were generated, because I think there's some issues with some of the assumptions that are being made, and I think in fairness to everybody, I think we should have that dialogue and make sure that it's addressed.
thank you.
Thank you. Clarifying.
Thank you.
I have a clarifying question for you. When you are asking, I would like to know how the numbers came to be
Yes.
and the assumptions. Are you asking how the other vendors came to their conclusions?
Everybody, like in a side-by-side comparison.
Thank you.
Yep.
Mr. Chairman, on the amendment,
Yes, Mr. Collins.
it's pretty clear we've been asked to approve what will be a contract with the copy machine provider, I guess, for lack of a better phrase. I have a question for Mr. Galvin, and that is, Mr. Galvin, is a municipal entity, is the school committee, very particularly, is the school committee permitted to enter into leases or enter into contracts, since we've already agreed that you will review the contract? Is a school committee permitted to enter into a contract which is more than 3 years?
My general advice on that is no. That is typically 3 years with options to renew thereafter. I'd have to look at the particular circumstances. I can remember one instance, but it was a very unique situation that allowed for a variation of that, but for the most part, typically it's 3 plus options.
Thank you, Mr. Galvin. Mr. Chairman, given Mr. Galvin's advice that we should not enter into more than a 3-year contract, I move to table this motion.
Motion's been made to table this motion. Is there a second? There's no second to the motion.
Mr. Chairman, further discussion, please?
It's Mr. Collins.
Mr. Galvin, can you give the Newport School Committee, at your convenience, a written explanation of what you just said? I fear we're entering into an illegal contract, and I'd like to see it in writing. Thank you.
So, Mr. Galvin, I do have a question for you. So I think, just to clarify, we are approving,
From what I'm hearing, it sounds like you're selecting a vendor tonight.
We're not
And you're, in the future, going to be reviewing and approving a contract relating to that vendor. But if you proceed with the amendment and then proceed with the main motion as amended, it sounds to me as if you're selecting a particular vendor this evening. I don't know if that's what the intention is, but I think
That was the intention of the motion.
that's what I'm hearing anyway.
so the contract will be before us at a later meeting.
That's what I'm understanding the motion to be.
Yes.
Dr. Colley, I just have one question. I don't have the number in the top of my head, but I think in the budget year that has just finished up, I believe we were close to $90,000 for the copying for this current budget.
I mean, for last year.
For last year's budget that we just finished, if I recall, the number was close to $90,000.
Yes.
So this is a substantial reduction from what we've been paying for the copying machines. Okay, thank you. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Oh, I'm sorry. Anybody who would like to speak, you have to come to the podium. That's all. Just same, and you'll be, I saw you, you're welcome to come up right after.
Sorry, I just want to make one point, that the reason, part of the reason why there's a savings is that's going from originally a shorter-term contract to now out to a 60-month contract, which is done at the request of the business manager and IT director to try to achieve a budget number. That's why that was done. When we last met on August 1st, at that time, we were the lowest bidder. I was told we were the lowest bidder. Something changed on that. I don't know what happened, but I would still like to make sure that we have an accounting that's not putting assumptions into this that may or may not be met. That's it.
Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you. I'm one of the competing vendors on the bid for the copiers, and I've been working pretty diligently on this for about the past month with.
Excuse me, could you just identify yourself?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Address for the.
My name is Matthew Blair. My company is Innovex, and we're based in Lincoln, Rhode Island. As I stated, I've been working on this project for about a month now, and I had submitted some numbers based on what is being stated for the first year at $54K and the second through fifth year at $49. I had submitted numbers that were substantially lower than that. I'm confident that my solution is equivalent and what it needs to be for the district. We currently support 40% of K-12 in Rhode Island. So I'm very ingrained in what the school department's needs are. So I just think if we're looking for the lowest numbers and the best solution, the comment was that it was showing the far lowest, but maybe there may be some type of an error there because it's certainly not. I'd rather not state my numbers publicly because I have other competitors here, but everything has been submitted to Mr. Kenkty and also Dr. Colley.
You submitted those numbers today, correct?
I forwarded them to you today. I had submitted them on Friday because I pushed for some last-minute negotiation last week to be as aggressive as possible. I was able to obtain additional support from the manufacturer, which allowed me to be able to pass that on to the school department. The reduction was about $20,000 per year that I was able to negotiate with the manufacturer last week.
So
Dr. Colley, I have a question. So the current arrangement, do we have a lease, the agreement that we have now, is it a month-to-month, or is it a lease agreement, or are we extending an existing contract at this point?
At this point, the lease is expired, or will expire.
So
September.
when's the lease going to expire? do you know?
September.
September.
Okay, thank you.
And our vote tonight was based on the lowest bidder for the numbers that we have before us that were submitted in time in the deadline for this meeting. So if you submitted something today, we don't have it.
I didn't submit it today, Miss. I submitted it on Friday morning, and then I wasn't able to get any feedback from it, so I researched and found Dr. Colley was also involved, so I forwarded it to him today because I hadn't had any response since Friday.
We already had our agenda on
Wednesday.
Right, so there must have been a deadline.
Dr. Colley,
So it was beyond the deadline.
Basically.
could you explain the deadline for the benefit of the committee, please, Dr. Colley?
Go for it.
I don't remember the date I gave all the vendors, but deadline was, I'd have to look it up, the exact date.
But everybody got the same information, I'm assuming?
Yeah, when I first met with all the vendors, I gave them, I think I met them on a Monday, told them we need all the best numbers by Wednesday.
So if something came in on Friday, it was beyond the date you had given them?
Correct.
Okay, so there is a motion made and seconded. We've had discussion. If there's no other discussion, I'm going to ask to vote on the motion. So all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Aye.
Motion carries.
Mr. Chair, was that on the amendment?
It was on the amended motion, correct? Mrs. Gaines amended it. Mrs. Sylvia seconded.
But did you vote on the amendment?
Yes.
Was that
Oh.
the vote you
That was
just
the
took?
amendment.
No. That was a vote on the amended.
So now you have to take the main vote.
Now, okay, so
The
the
main
motion now would be approval of the request to recommend this vendor for a contract. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. Next item on the agenda is 3.9, request for approval of the TMS academic plan to be presented by the superintendent and Mrs. Sullivan.
Thank you.
Excuse me? Oh, I'm sorry, 3.8, I'm sorry, I skipped right over. I went too fast, apologize. Next motion, next item up is 3.8. With the budget, which I believe Dr. Colley will be staying up there for that, and the superintendent, I believe they both have recommendations to discuss on this item.
So I'm just going to bring to your attention 3.8 you received in your backup for the fiscal year 2019. Dr. Colley has gone through all the lines. He's also met with me, central office, assistant superintendent, director of technology, all the building principals, and we've gone through and we've had to make some difficult decisions, as you've already heard presented to you tonight. So in front of you this evening, you have under item 3.8, you have each of the areas in which the budget expenses are listed. And then you also have, after all is said and done, those expenses match our revenues at $40,494,788. And then as you go through, you'll see on one of the pages, you'll see areas we reduced and areas we had to increase. And you'll have two columns there that show how we balanced the budget. And again, some difficult decisions had to be made. We also, for your observations and for you to see more clearly, you have a color-coded chart that shows you the full-time equivalents, the staffing we had in 2018, and the staffing proposed for 2019. They're in yellow and red. So you should have those charts as well. They're at the back of the 3.8 backup.
So I'm going to first ask on 3.8 on the colored chart, if you wouldn't mind going through that. I don't know that we don't have any for the audience, but if you could go through that and explain the changes that were made in the fiscal 19 budget, just run through and address the changes and what they represent.
Right, I'm going to have Dr. Colley go through them. Because my voice is going to
Oh,
As you can see, beginning on the central administration area, those are staff that either work in all the schools or staff that work in departments that are considered to be outside of the buildings. There were no changes until you get to the student services area, where you have a requested increase for physical therapy of 0.5. That's increasing somebody who's part-time to full-time. We did reduce the diagnostician position. The person, I believe, retired, so we are not hiring back that position. We did increase the ELL director. As you know, this is a new position that we've been talking to you about in terms of required by this by the state and federal. We also have a position called integration specialist that we have not put into the budget yet. We simply put it in there as a request, so you know that the request has been made. We're still pending funding. We're hoping that perhaps some grant funding can be used for that. If you go to the next page, you start to see the positions in categories ranging from administration all the way to nurse and custodians. And as you go through the list, you will see the changes are highlighted. Right now, where you go through the administration, there is no changes. Administrative support, no changes. Deans, no changes. Elementary teachers, you see that we have a 7 or 8 because at this point, kindergarten used to be 9 teachers for last year. If you look at the chart on the left side to the chart on the right side, at this point, we do not believe that we need a kindergarten teacher, but that's based on the current numbers of registration. That may increase. Therefore, if that position is not required at Pell Elementary, we would move it to 5th grade in order to complete some of the, not just use the scheduling that they're trying to put together, but also the structure of the groups for the clusters for the staff. We did reduce several positions at the high school, 1 position in science, a 0.8 in social studies, and 1 position in world languages. Many of these were done through retirees. And then we have also a request for vocational, which is pending an increase in tuitions. So if we see an increase in tuition, we probably will decrease one of the assistants and convert them into a teacher. But again, that's pending tuition numbers. And again, we haven't had all the registrations come back for NACDAC yet from out of district. We did reduce a position in the middle school, 0.5 art. We also were able to increase an ELL position, half-time at the high school, half-time at the middle school. This was to take care of some of the increasing numbers in ELL students that we see and the level of the students that are coming in that require a little bit more intensive help in learning English. In order to do that, we did reduce reading by 2 positions, 1 at the middle school, 1 at the high school. In terms of special education, even though there is no total change in the number of special ed teachers, we did move some teachers from the middle school, 1 to the elementary school, 1 to the high school. And in terms of paraprofessionals, we did add one paraprofessional at Pell. That is in order to deal with a special education student coming into the district. We also had to reduce custodians at Pell Elementary by one. And basically, those are the changes that we see that helped us balance the budget and maintain as much as we could the programs that we had.
I believe, Dr. Colley, if you could explain it, are there at the bottom, at the next page? The bottom, there are some, I think there's an overall chart that shows the staffing, but below there, there's some wording, fiscal 18 to fiscal 19. Were those changes as well, or what does that language represent?
There were a few small changes in areas that are not our payroll employees, but there are people that do work in the schools that we did make some changes. So, for example, we had the security guards at the Rogers High School. We were able to reduce their expense. I think the principal is looking to get some internships from one of the local higher education institutions. The other ones is just to show you that those positions or grants or by contract that are in there remain. There's no changes to them, but I know that there was a question about those positions, even though they're paid from grants or they're paid from a contract line instead of a salary line.
In the behavior specialist, one per school, it says contract/GL.
General ledger, meaning our budget. The other one is a contract, but it's coming from a grant.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Are there any questions?
You asked all mine.
Is there anybody from the public that's here that would like to speak to any of the items that you just heard? You just need to go to the podium and identify yourself and
My name is Diane Sheehan, and I'm Supervisor of the Arts. And I know the distinguished school committee and administration. I sent information about the .5 middle school art position being cut. And my question is that with the new scheduling and curriculum, which will be addressed, I would assume shortly, is just that how to make up for a teacher that's still needed there, because art needs to happen at every grade level. And I'm not sure that that is being accomplished right now. So I guess that's a question possibly Mrs. Sullivan can answer. I know I've been in contact with her, just trying to find out how the schedule fits. And right now, just because of the way the schedule is with the rotational day 6 schedule, has created a loophole, really, in the art program as far as the students getting less art. And I would like that addressed. I know the school committee did see my concerns that I sent to them, and I'd like to hear some feedback on that also.
Mrs. Gaines.
I've been here.
Mr. Chairman, just a quick point of order, if I could. I held off on my questions because I don't think anyone has made a motion to approve this, and I don't think there was a second. Who is motioning that this budget should be approved?
There hasn't been a motion yet.
Okay, can we have a motion and a second before we get into discussion and questions, please?
That's the chairman's call.
I'll entertain if there's a motion and a second for discussion purposes.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, motion's been made and seconded. Now we can have discussion on the motion. Mrs. Gaines.
In addressing this current budget, of all the years that I've been here, this is one of the most difficult that I've seen. And it's difficult for me on a personal level. I spent most of my elementary career as a music teacher. First, we saw the loss of a music room here at Pell. And to see the arts cut hurts deeply on a personal level. But when you sit here and you have limited funds, you have to make those hard decisions that you lose sleep over, and this is one of them. I don't see where we have a choice. If there were a choice, I'm sure we would not be losing a music teacher. Or a reading teacher.
Mr. Collins, did you have?
I have a number of questions, Mr. Chairman, but I'll hold off, or if you want me to ask them one by one, or if you want me to ask all at once, it's the chairman's prerogative.
Let's see how it goes.
Okay.
Let's just-
We'll see how it goes. Mr. Colley, my first question is, and perhaps Mr. Galvin or the superintendent can help you with this. Does the requirement by RIDE, do RIDE regulations hold the weight of law? I ask you that because this budget includes a position for a new administrator. We have seen the Teachers Association of Newport and Council 94 voluntarily take pay freezes for 1 year to help us deal with a nearly $1.1 million budget deficit. But yet, we see in this budget, in this proposed budget, that we are to hire yet another director, yet another administrator. I simply cannot believe that the Rhode Island Department of Education is permitted, without General Assembly directive, to tell us who to hire. There are certain things that are ingrained in law, but I'd like to know very specifically where it is ingrained in law that we must have a special education, or if you will, a ELL director, an ELL administrator, at the expense, by the way, at many, many teaching positions and other positions.
So first of all, we had to balance this budget, and I know people keep saying the teachers in Council 94 took a budget freeze or a salary freeze. What they did is freeze just the budget or the contract the way it was, so they still have their steps and lanes increasing.
Mr. Colley, they took a pay freeze. Let's not try to fool the public. They took a pay freeze. I appreciate your answer, but let's be honest with the public. None of this semantics. They took a pay freeze.
It's not semantics. We had to increase the budget in order to meet our financial obligations to those two unions. So that was an increase. However, in terms of the requisition for having another director, if you will, what the state requires is that you have someone who is in charge as an administrator of ELL as a department. They do that as part of the requirements in order to fulfill federal law, some of it which is along the lines of being equitable towards students who speak a different language and are coming into our schools. So if you have over 100 students, you're considered to be a high incident school district, and therefore you must have one of those, or else they can withhold their funding. And I'm talking about Title III, and I'm talking about the state funding as well. They do have that capability. So yes, we are required to do that.
I don't think my question was answered clearly enough. I wanted to know With regard to federal funding and the withholding of title funds, that's a separate question. I want to know if the Rhode Island General Assembly, if there is a law on the books, so to speak, in Rhode Island that requires this. I'm not willing to simply spend money at the whim of the Rhode Island Department of Education. If we are required by state law to hire this director, to hire this new administrator, then our beef is with Rhode Island General Assembly. But if there is no state law that requires this, then we should not be spending this money for a new administrator. Is there a state law that requires this?
I don't know, Mr. Chairman. I haven't had an opportunity to look at that question, so I can't give you a definitive answer on that. And if there isn't one, it becomes a decision of the committee to make.
So just like I contact RIDE on certifications and anything else, I did, and as a matter of fact, I believe I had this discussion in public about having to hire a director when we had to look at teachers, because I was not in favor of doing that, and I was trying to work with RIDE to see if something could be accomplished. There is something on the books with them on English language learners. I'll be happy to forward it to you. And I'll also be happy to forward it to the press and the entire teaching staff to see. But what we were trying to do was we were trying to get around that. And actually, with we are a high incident district for English language learners. And as far as the trending goes, it's just going to continue to rise. So as Dr. Colley was explaining the budget this evening, one of the positions that we no longer have, we're using the funding from that to fund part of the director's position. So that's what we're doing. Does anyone or everyone like this? Absolutely not. But we're preparing for the future, and we're preparing for what's coming our way. We're going to have more English language learners. And the more we can address them at early ages, and the more we can implement more oversight, hopefully our English language learners will improve in their academic standings and in their achievement. But I'll be happy to forward that to you.
Will you be forwarding me the state law, or will you be forwarding to all those you mentioned the RIDE regulation?
I'll be forwarding you the RIDE regulations.
The RIDE regulation, okay.
Right, just like the RIDE regulations on other areas we follow.
Okay. For the record, I don't think we're obligated, because I don't believe RIDE can tell us what to do. They have certain, there are certain allowances that the General Assembly gives to RIDE, but the General Assembly does not allow the Rhode Island Department of Education to enact law. Only the General Assembly can do that. And this is another example of, I think, hiring an administrator when it is inappropriate. I have one more question, and then, speaking of appropriate or inappropriate, at the appropriate time, I will offer an amendment, Mr. Chairman. My question for Dr. Colley or the superintendent is regarding the vocational line item, or at least regarding what you spoke of earlier. You are requesting to move an assistant to a teacher position pending an increase in tuitions. Two-part question. Number one, is this a move to a full teaching position, a member of TAN, or is this a position which is, for example, a paraeducator or some other non-TAN position?
It would be going from a Council 94 position to a TAN position.
Okay, a full certified teacher. Thank you. You mentioned, as I just did, pending tuitions. You also have another request which is not yet included, but pending additional funding to be identified, and that is to say within the technology department, if we have a technology department in the schools. You are asking that an integration specialist be included. Are those two positions funded in this proposed budget, even though you say requested pending additional funding or pending additional funding? Are we including the money in the budget now for those positions and hoping that we will get reimbursed by additional outside funding, or are we in a position where we are approving a budget without the funding for those two positions, and if we find the funding, we find it. In other words, how will these people be paid until such time that we have the funding, or are we giving them the funding now in the hopes, again, to get reimbursed?
No, what we're doing is we're saying the positions have been requested. They will not be posted or filled until we have additional funding. If there is no additional funding, the positions will not happen, and no, they're not in this budget.
Thank you, Dr. Carley. Mr. Chairman, at the appropriate time, I have two amendments to offer.
All right, any other discussion? Mr. Collins?
Mr. Chairman, I move to amend the action item before us and add the language, the Newport School Committee hereby rescinds administrative pay increases which were awarded in fiscal 2019.
Okay, there's no second to that motion, Mr. Collins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I move to amend the action item before us, and I move to add language which would prohibit the superintendent from hiring additional administrators or directors in fiscal 19.
Again, I don't see a second to that motion, Mr. Collins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, there is a motion before us, and any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed?
Aye.
Motion carries. Next item on the agenda is item 3.9, request for approval of TMS academic plan. Presented by-
Mr. Chair, may I ask the attorney a question, Mr. Galvin? Mr. Galvin, am I allowed to hire people?
You recommend appointing, you do not hire.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, point of order. Since that was obviously directed at me, I think everybody understands what I was suggesting, that the superintendent, by way of my last motion, not recommend the hiring of any additional administrators or directors. Nice try, Superintendent Germain.
Okay, so moving on, item 3.9, Superintendent Germain and Mrs. Sullivan will be presenting the information.
All right, thank you very much. I'm going to let Ms. Sullivan speak, and we also have a PowerPoint if we need to take a look at that as far as the schedule so the public can see it as well.
During the month of July, we had roughly 15 members of the Thompson Middle School staff, along with the building administration, district administration, the Great Schools Partnership, and the DM group, working together to try to come up with a schedule that was more equitable in the way of classes for all of our students and got us closer to the middle school model that so many of us believe so firmly in. When I was interviewed by the school committee, Mrs. Gaines, your question to me, question number one, was whether I believed in homogeneous or heterogeneous classes, and I made it clear at the time that my heart was with heterogeneous classes. That notion carried through in the work that the teachers did over that period in July. It was the teachers, that's correct. The end result of the time that we spent together was the beginnings of the documents that were shared with the committee, taking a look at making some important changes that we think will benefit all students at Thompson. If you were to refer back to the letter that I wrote that was shared with you, we are moving towards a 6-day schedule, which will align us with Rogers High School. All of our students will have equal opportunities, not only to their core classes, but also to their exploratories. Some of those exploratories will become semester exploratories, which again, by doing that, allows us to have more students taking advantage of those pieces. As you heard, it does create a small issue for us in that we lost that .5 art. We do have one section, one class, that we have to figure out how to get art for, but that is a work in progress as the schedule is as a whole. We are instituting what is called Power Hour. That will happen 3 times during the week. And Power Hour is an opportunity for enrichment for our students. It is modeled after a program that we did several years ago called Spark, and it allows our students and our teachers to make connections around things that are interesting to them. The teachers offer these activities, and the students sign up on a rotational basis by quarter. We know that the more opportunities we can give our middle-level students, the more well-rounded students they become. And this is also another opportunity, along with the reinstitution of an advisory class, to begin to make those bonds that we know are so important for our students. Earlier this year, the school committee approved a top math section for all of our grades. That does appear in the schedule. Beyond that single top math class, all of our other classes are heterogeneously grouped. So the instruction during those classrooms, during those class periods, will be standards-based, differentiated instruction, where our teachers will be able to meet the needs of all of the students that they see in front of them, from those who need additional assistance to those who are ready to be pushed in other areas. Our math also, we took a look at, and one of the things that we found with the changing of testing, for example, is our 8th grade algebra students didn't get the normal 8th grade math standards. When our students were tested with the Park algebra test, our kids did really, really well. But now we've moved to the RICAS test, where it's a standard 8th grade math test, and our algebra students, for example, in grade 8, will not be getting the standard 8th grade standards. So in that schedule, you see the tiered support areas. Those tiered support areas allow us to give additional math instruction to our top groups to be able to move them even further within the standards. Our English, as I said, math and science teachers will be working heterogeneously to push those children as well. The cluster challenge and support time that you see in the schedule is an additional piece this year that will allow us to provide both supports and challenge. It's an opportunity for the core teachers to work with the students in their cluster to meet their needs. And that can be done in multiple ways. It can be through additional core units of study, through interdisciplinary units, through project-based learning, through student interest-driven pieces. So within this schedule, there are multiple opportunities for us to meet the needs of all of the students that walk through the doors of Thompson Middle School.
So I'm just going to read what I had from the backup, because I know we have parents, and I promised and I said we would have accelerated classes in all content areas. And the more we talked and the more we went further, we were supposed to have a high-level social studies, high-level math, high-level English. The more the teachers worked on this and the more we all sat around and how can we challenge all students, the fear of not being equitable kept coming up. And I did, and I kept coming, and that's why I came back at the last meeting to find out the direction and make sure we were certain in the direction you as the school committee wanted to go. And the more the students were the more the teachers were talking, and Ms. Sullivan and others, our assistant superintendent and everyone, it was, we have to do it this way to be able to reach all children. And I know it's very disappointing, and I apologize to the parents, because I know this is most like, I don't want to speak for them, but I don't think this is what they were looking for at the time. So the challenge and the challenge clusters, as Ms. Sullivan and I have spoken to, have expressed the need to have that so we make sure we're challenging all our children. And we also have to look at the behaviors in the classroom. And that is something I've pushed with Ms. Sullivan as far as we want students to be very clear on what our expectations are of their behaviors and learning, and that why we're all here in school. The other part to all this is with the teachers. And with the teachers, I had a frank discussion with the group that was with us, and jump in if I say anything wrong. But I had a frank discussion that one of the biggest, I'll just say, concerns I hear from parents when they feel their children are not being challenged is that the teacher says, well, I have such a wide range in my class, how can I address all students? And that's when you get they're going to teach to the middle and all that. We're making it very clear we want to support teachers as far as differentiation. Dr. Behan has more on that as far as the year goes forward with professional development, but the Chromebooks should help us tremendously as far as enabling within the classroom the teachers to be able to differentiate and challenge the students. I put in the backup that the ability to offer the accelerated classes in all content areas was not realized. Accelerated opportunities through different schedule blocks or challenges given to students that wish to take these is under discussion and it's being worked on. And I must say, Ms. Sullivan and her team have been working even over this past weekend to get everything together. The teachers, administration, guidance personnel have been working with the DMG group. I personally reached out to the Superintendent's Association the weekend of the 4th and 5th just to see, is there something we're missing? Is there something we're not doing? Or is there something we can do to offer, especially our most, I'll say, children that really want to advance some courses opportunities. I did not get a single superintendent that could give me anything. South Kingston one time tried a high-level ELA as well, and they said that didn't work, and they changed that. They even tried IB at one point, and they stopped that. So I then, because I was at a professional development opportunity with the high school teachers, Mr. Vance last weekend, Dr. Behan, I reached out to those consultants, they're nationwide, and I said, listen, I have, here's where we're at, and I have families that are really looking for this, and I want all Newport students to come to Newport schools, but if we can't offer, how do we do this? And that's when Ms. Sullivan and I have briefly talked about that with the groups being heterogeneously grouped for the science, English, and social studies, they offer a cluster, a challenge, like what's your challenge? Is there a challenge opportunity each week for this group? And it's almost where some are trending as far as honors, and we had this brief discussion last year. Instead of courses being called honors at the high school, they let them do something else, and then it's called an honors. But parents want that, and we have the honors decal on all our classes at the high school. But this was an opportunity, they thought, at the middle school. No, at the high school. We don't have honors. In the middle school? No, not at the middle school. So that was, you have the backup. I don't want to read it entirely to you, but I do want to make it a point that, and I did even in my presentation, because I really did want to try to offer all this, and that's why I said to Ms. Sullivan, make sure you're really clear, because this is something that we really need to study. We want to make sure we're challenging all students, and that's where we're at. I also want to point out, I don't think a lot of people understand the amount of time and energy, and if I'm not mistaken, this is as soon as you've put the schedule together, correct? Yeah. Right, so a lot of people I think, oh, well, we have this schedule ready in June. No, we have to look at the enrollment, we have to look at the needs of the students, and it's usually not until the week before school starts that the schedule gets fleshed out, class assignments and everything else. And we're working on that to improve, and I commend the Thompson Middle School team and teachers for getting this all together as quickly as they did.
You've heard the recommendation of the superintendent.
I move the recommendation.
Recommendation's been motion's been made to approve the recommendation and seconded. Discussion on the recommendation. Mrs. Gaines.
I have heard from several teachers at Thompson, and they are ecstatic that we are finally moving away from tracking. And everybody knows how I feel about tracking, so I won't go into that. But I'm looking forward to seeing more progress in this area. And I do think there is room for those students who want to excel. I think the teachers can accommodate that. I have all the confidence in the world in the teachers at Thompson Middle School. Sorry. I don't think our teachers are limited, that they have to teach to the middle. I don't believe that. And I'm looking forward to seeing a lot of progress.
Mrs. Flowers.
Yeah.
Sorry, Dr. Flowers.
Okay. I had responded to one of the messages from one of the teachers who was just, it came right through on the letter how excited she is, and I guess shares it with a lot of others. And I said, when I saw how you want people from outside of the school to come in and work, like on the power hour, I asked Mrs. Sullivan, you know, can you take an aging retired teacher to help out? She says yes. and it kind of harked back to many, many years ago where we had like one afternoon a week at Underwood Elementary. And I don't know whatever happened. It kind of just fell apart afterwards. Maybe it was a change of leadership. But each teacher seemed to have some project in mind or some particular skill set that could be shared. And we had like an ungraded setup. Usually 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade kids work together. And we had our school newspaper in my room. So we started it then and continued. 4th grade teacher taught the kids some woodworking. I mean, that's just an anecdotal reference from years ago. But that is just minor compared to the wonderful experiences here. And again, having had, again from experience, students who had challenges and who have been brought, say, into the so-called regular classroom or working with kids who find some things easier. You get some kids with challenges who will say, hey, I can try that, I can do that, and all of a sudden they rise up and then will challenge themselves. And the youngsters learn to be very understanding of one another. I mean, you have concerns. Sometimes you say you have to group some of the students together according to ability, a little ad hoc grouping. But this whole plan and all the effort that's been put into this, just the rotation and the 6-day plans and all that, I think it's a credit to all the people who worked on it, and I think we should be very, very proud of our teachers for doing all of this. Thank you all who worked on this.
Mr. Collins, did you have?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, I want to thank Ms. Olenek, Ms. Walton Ferrier, Ms. Raffa, and Ms. Brownell, I'm sorry, and all of the Thompson teachers who offered feedback. I think it's tremendous that they have stepped up to the plate, volunteered their summer time to get involved with other stakeholders in the preparation for the TMS schedule for 2018-2019. I also want to thank, of course, parents and other stakeholders who got involved, but I mean, there are obviously very passionate points on both sides of this discussion, this vote tonight. But, Mr. Chairman, I will be voting no on the proposal, and the reason I'm voting no is because the parents were told one thing on a number of occasions, at least 3 occasions, and they were presented with something this evening which is completely different than what they were told. Thank you.
Okay, I just had a couple of questions. The Power Hour, I know we've heard it before, the Power Hour, what type of activities or what would be the focus of the Power Hour?
The activities that would be offered during Power Hour would be generated by not only the teachers, but I'm hoping by the students as well. The teachers have things that they enjoy, things that they're good at, above and beyond being a teacher. And it could be anything from, origami or jewelry making, as I'm looking out and seeing Suzanne Bassine in the back. I know both of those would be great things for her to offer. Mr. Carlin, you mentioned Mrs. Walton Faria. She's also sitting in the back. As a second career teacher, her first career was oceanography. I think there would be a great thing that she could offer the students. Also during Power Hour, we will be having our ensembles, our band, chorus, and orchestra time.
So the second part of that question would be the supports and challenges. I noticed in the schedule that there are several areas for the supports and challenges, and how will those be accomplished? Namely, the accelerated kids, I think you said there would be several ways to do it. One of them, I think I wrote a note that you said there'd be pullouts or times that they would be in. How would that be accomplished for the accelerated children?
For example, during the block that says tiered supports, which I believe may be purple on your copy, that is the time where our math teachers will, for example, be taking our top math students and providing them with that bump of additional math instruction. That would also be a block of time where if we had a student who had, let's say, an IEP that needed to be serviced, they could use part of that time for the servicing of that IEP.
Okay, thank you. Any other discussion? Any audience, anybody in the audience that would like to make a comment or just talk on this subject? Okay, seeing no discussion, motion has been made to approve and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Aye.
Motion carries.
Mr. Chairman, can we have the vote tally, please? For the public, just in
I
case.
believe the vote tally was 4-1.
Thank you.
Next motion, next item on the agenda is 3.10, request for approval to clarify school committee's expectations regarding the superintendent's authority, continued from the July 23rd meeting. And I believe there was questions that Mr. Galvin was going to look into that were raised on several items on a list that was presented and approved that night.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I did have an opportunity to look at the item that was adopted by the school committee at its last meeting. And it's described as a clarification of the committee's expectations regarding the superintendent's authority. And policy, state law, as well as your own policies, are quite clear as it relates to the delegation of administrative governance of the school system, and that is delegated by you to the superintendent. State law supports that as well. However, looking at the item that was adopted, it appears that for the most part, efforts at intrusion into administrative or operational activities has been carefully avoided for the most part. There are 2 or 3 instances that I would like to point out to you for your reflection. But in looking at all 11 items on the list, all of them, for the most part, take place already in the activities and the interchange between the superintendent and the school committee. I would say it's unusual to see it expressed this way and see it in writing this way, but from a practical standpoint, most of the activities do already occur. I would like to indicate that I think, for the most part, the school committee has the ability and the right to express their point of view this way. And I point to a reference in state law which deals with the Code of Basic Management Principles and Ethical School Standards, and that's in 16-2-9.1. And I would just like to read one phrase that kind of highlights this thing, and that's subsection 3. And I'll just read it for you. And it says, one of the principles and ethical school standards is that the school committee should recognize their critical responsibility for selecting the superintendent, defining his or her responsibilities, and evaluating his or her performance regularly without directly engaging in administrative processes. I think that nails it on the head as far as creating that line of demarcation between oversight by the committee and intrusion into administrative responsibilities. Again, as I say, for the most part, all 11 stays clear of that line, I think. In number 1, which was pointed out by Mrs. Gaines, the language that's used, I think, is not correct in terms of where it says no individual may be offered a position within the Newport School Department without prior approval of the school committee. It's not a major distinction, but the words should be without the advice and consent of the school committee. Not a big difference, but to be accurate, those are the words that make it in compliance. The two other items that struck me as a bit cause for concern of perhaps coming close to that line. One is item number 4, which says no employee may be transferred without prior approval of the school committee. Clearly, in the recommendation for appointment, that is the purview of the superintendent. And so clearly the school committee's advice and consent would take place in those instances. I've not seen anything relative to that level regarding transfers of personnel. There's no question, I think, and in fact, in practice, I think the superintendent informs you of those situations when they occur and keeps you well abreast of those things. And I was trying to think of examples where it might be inappropriate to have this kind of restriction on the superintendent. And just one small example that came to mind was just the nature of substitute teachers. That's somewhat of a daily or routine activity that occurs and involves transfer and assignment of personnel that typically doesn't go or involve the school committee. So I'd like you to reflect on that particular one. The last one that gave me pause for reflection was number 9, which says the superintendent shall immediately inform the committee of any personnel issues. That's a very broad expression, a very broad statement. I think certainly the superintendent strives and tends to achieve informing you of personnel matters that occur, and certainly significant personnel matters. But to have such a broad expression like this, that's starting to get close to that line of involving the school committee in day-to-day operations and administrative aspects. If simply a modifier of any significant personnel issues was considered, that seems to create that demarcation again, so as to not be intrusive of that involvement in the administrative aspect of it. But on balance, I think it's something that you have in your ability to do based on the example that I read from the Code of Basic Management Principles and Ethical School Standards. Clearly, there's been a delegation by policy and law for administrative activities to the superintendent. But those are my observations, Mr. Chairman, as far as those specific items.
What about number 11?
Well, you mentioned that, I think, at the last meeting, And I wasn't quite sure of the concern you had in this sense. It talks about the weekly calendar shall be shared with the committee so that the committee is aware of any meetings that are occurring during the week. To my knowledge, I think that's achieved already, that's done already, that there is an exchange of information along those lines.
I interpreted that to mean calendar going forward.
I didn't read it that way when I was looking at it. If that's the intent, that starts to get close to that personnel issue, that broad expression of intruding into day-to-day operations. I was interpreting it and reading it more, filling you in on what she's been doing.
Okay.
So I suppose you could read it both ways, but if it's prospective in nature, it's getting close.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
I'd like to move that we table this document. I think that the superintendent complies with everything here, and I don't see any need for it.
I second the motion.
Motion to table it has been made and seconded. Any discussion?
Mr. Chairman, I would point out that it's been adopted, so I'm not sure what the intent is there.
Correct. This document was adopted with the exception of your review of the three items that you discussed tonight, 1, 4, and 11, at last month's meeting.
Okay,
Correct?
yes.
Well, I move those items be struck from the document.
So there was a motion to table it first of all, and it was seconded, but no action was taken on that.
1 second.
I just made a motion. I didn't get a second, right?
Mr. Galvin, could you clarify? So there
Yeah,
was a motion made to
there's a
table the
motion pending to table it, and I just wasn't clear what was being tabled, that's all that my inquiry is.
Mr. Chair, if I may ask a question. Mrs. Gaines is one who voted in the majority last week. She can move to reconsider the previous vote
Yeah,
to adopt it.
yeah, I don't think that it's necessarily a motion for reconsideration. I think you can take whatever action you want to take relative to this topic. My view on motions for reconsideration are more at the same meeting,
Or the next meeting.
sometimes the next meeting, if called for. But even so, if you wanted to undo the action, you have every right to do that. I don't think you're precluded from doing that, is what I'm suggesting to you.
So what would the motion be then?
May I voice my concern? My concern is that those items that I had asked for review are bordered on micromanagement or inappropriate action of the school committee in regard to the duties of the superintendent. Those items were explained by council, and my motion is to strike those items from the document.
So Mr. Galvin can clarify, but I don't believe the items were included in the document as it was approved last month.
They were continued.
Yes, those were not adopted, those specific items were not adopted. So everything else was but those items.
So the document as it was adopted last month included all items with the exception of 1, 4, and 11.
Correct.
Is that correct?
That's what the vote was last.
Okay, in that case, I'll withdraw my motion.
I think they were continued.
I don't remember.
Yes, until you asked for the attorney's opinion. Can't we just get rid of the whole thing?
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Collin.
there were 2 votes that evening. Both Dr. Flowers and I voted in the negative on the First Amendment and the only amendment, which removed those 3 items that Mrs. Gaines is referring to. And then Dr. Flowers and I voted against the final proposal, which was,
I voted against it.
I'm sorry, Ms. Sylvia voted against it as well, but both documents, the amendment and the eventual amended document, were voted on. There was no continuance.
Yeah, looking at the minutes, it appears that a motion to endorse the list and hold in abeyance 4 and 11 that was made and seconded, that was amended to continue the item to the next meeting, and then the motion as amended was passed. So it was continued.
And I will go back to my motion to strike those items that will continue.
Okay, so what, I need to understand the motion because I'm lost in the motion myself at the moment.
I thought it was, wasn't it 1, 4, and 11?
So we are, the motion as made would be to adopt the document from last month?
No, it was already adopted.
No,
Well,
it was continued.
reading the minutes, if you adopt the minutes as proposed, it appears that the main motion was made, that main motion was amended to continue it to the next meeting, and that motion as amended was passed.
Mr. Chairman,
So it's been
I make an
continued.
oral amendment to rescind the entire document. Can I have a second?
Second.
Okay, motion's been made, seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. On to 3.11. Request for approval of a Chromebook loan agreement. Mr. Vance, I believe. And Mr. Kennedy.
This is good news. Hooray.
Just want to give us a brief description of what's before us tonight. That's
Yeah, so these are documents that we're looking to use with a one-to-one Chromebook pilot for our freshman class for this upcoming school year. We'd be looking to have that class of around 160, 170 kids have the device with them 24 hours a day. They'd be able to take them home. And so what this is an agreement between us and the families about the care and maintenance of that Chromebook. And just some information about how to do it, and then really looking at the Chromebook use and care policy. And so we're just looking to make sure that parents are fully aware of what they're carrying home and what the requirements are of that. You know, some of the information that we'll end up providing that evening will be some discounted Wi-Fi services through Cox, and then some information around locations in the city of Newport that provide free Wi-Fi, so we can really get the biggest bang for our buck with kids having the devices with them when they go home. You know, that's where the biggest payoff comes with using the Chromebooks, is having that 24-hour access.
Sounds good to me.
And I just want to, if any of you recall, City Council, this was a specific question, I believe it was Councilperson Leonard that asked about the children having access, and for those that don't have access, how are we going to handle this? So I want to thank Mr. Vance and Mr. Cuente. They kind of got together, finding places throughout the city, et cetera, where students can use these Chromebooks, and then also creating this policy. The other thing is they're having an event, and I think it's very important. We're going to try to get the word out on August 24th? 27th, on August 27th in the cafeteria. We want to hand out the Chromebooks to our incoming freshmen and also meet with the parents and go over everything. So we'll make sure we publicize that, get the word out through Newport This Week and other publications of what we're trying to do so that all our students have access to these tools. So I want to thank both Mr. Vance and Mr. Cuente for putting this together.
Thank you. You've heard the item.
I move recommendation.
Motion's been made to approve and seconded. Any discussion? Seeing no discussion, all those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries.
It's unanimous. Thank you.
Correct, it was. Next item up is section 4, which is discussion, and the item under discussion for this evening is the NACTech tuition.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I had this put on the item because as a discussion item with all of you, Mr. Young is away at a conference and he was not able to be here this evening. He will be happy to come back and speak further about this. But you, as a committee, I believe, wanted to have a discussion about the NACTAC tuition. And as I had shared with you, we have a general person's agreement amongst all of us superintendents that participate in the program that our tuitions for our programs are all the same. So in that way, we don't start outbidding each other like what has happened across the state in other places for vocational programs, and all of us agree that we'll keep the same rates. Rogers is unusual where we have a half-time program, and that half-time program is half the cost of what a full day's tuition would be for our students. So one of the things Mr. Young asked me to please stress with you is to remember that the seats in the classroom would be available whether the students were full-time with us all day or half-time. And actually, children that come to us half-time allows them more opportunities as far as coming to Rogers for our pathways. We receive a tuition, half, from the district, and it just opens up more opportunities. So it is unique, and Mr. Young will be happy to speak at the next meeting about this more. But it was a placeholder because you did want to bring this up. And I have alerted the other superintendents that the committee is under discussion regarding tuition rates.
Okay, very good. We'll move along based on that. We'll continue that to our next meeting for next month with more information from the staff. Next item on the agenda is consent agenda. Item 5.1 would be approval of minutes.
So moved.
Second? Second.
Motion's been made and seconded. Any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion carries. Next item on the agenda,
Mr. Chairman,
yes.
may I please separate item C2, a leave of absence request from a history teacher at TMS, from the remainder of the personnel action items.
Second?
Motion's been made and seconded. Would we, with that said, I would entertain a motion to accept the rest of the consent agenda.
So moved.
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded. Any discussion? So the motion would be to approve the consent agenda with the exception of item C2 for further discussion. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries.
Mr. Chairman, regarding item C2, as we are dealing with that separately, I would move to amend the request to comply with the Teachers Association of Newport Public Schools contract, allowing the individual to take a sabbatical rather than a leave of absence for 1 year, as described in the individual's personnel letter to the superintendent and the school committee. I would like a second on that, please.
I'll second that, but I do have some questions.
We can go into discussion. So the motion has been made and seconded to amend the request to a sabbatical per the requirements of the TAN contract. The motion's been made and seconded. Any discussion on the motion? Mrs. Gaines.
Mr. Browner is here, and I'm sure if we have any questions, he would be willing to speak to. I have no problem with the sabbatical, but my question is why was not the standard protocol for asking for sabbatical not followed? Did you have a reason for that?
I do, and it was stated in the letter. Good evening. First to our superintendent and to the chair of the school committee, I greet all of you this evening. My name is Michael Browner, Jr. I teach grade 7 social studies at Thompson. As I stated in the letter, an opportunity to be on staff at the University of Rhode Island was offered to me by the director of the School of Education at the University of Rhode Island, Dr. David Bird. That invitation to teach at the University of Rhode Island came to me on the 28th of June. and it was much later than a request would need to be presented to the school committee, but the invitation to do this came to me after school was out, and so I had Dr. Bird to contact both Dr. Bean and Mrs. Germain, our superintendent, assistant superintendent, to make this request, and then it was requested of me to submit a letter to the school committee to ask of this request. So June 28th was when I was first made aware that the opportunity was on the table. So standard protocol in the contract states that it's necessary for such, so it was just offered to me in June, which is significantly later than February.
Mr. Chairman.
Just a minute, Mr. Collins. Ms. Gaines,
No, I'm
do you have-
done.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Thank you. Mr. Browner, can you explain how unique a situation this is with regard to the offer that the University of Rhode Island has made to the Newport Public School System with regard to your leave of absence for a year and having to fill your position?
Gladly. At the beginning of the invitation, when Madam Superintendent, is there, or should I continue?
No, you can continue,
Oh, okay.
please. I have to ask Dr. Bean a question,
okay.
because I've not spoken with anyone from the university, or no one has talked to me.
Shall I?
No, you continue. Please do.
Okay. Dr. David Bird, who is the director of the School of Education at the University of Rhode Island, offered me the opportunity to teach a new course, which is EDC 103, which is Education and Social Justice. In the past, I've been an adjunct at the University of Rhode Island, in addition to my full-time teaching status with Newport Public Schools for the past 20 years. I've served as an adjunct for about 3 years, or maybe about 4 semesters or so at the University of Rhode Island in the School of Education. I've taught both undergraduate and graduate level courses. A new course was presented, and Dr. Bird made it clear to me, Mike, you have received outstanding reviews in all of your course evaluations, both at the graduate and undergraduate level, and with equity in education and education and social justice being such a major topic in education today, we thought it would be a great opportunity for you to possibly teach for us if your school district is willing to loan you to us, in a way of speaking, for 1 year. I told Dr. Bird at that time that I would have to speak with our district leadership, both our superintendent and assistant superintendent, and find out what the protocol would be for asking for such an invitation to move forward. At that time, Dr. Bird said that he would contact our district leadership in the form of Mrs. Germain and Dr. Bean, and it was the recommendation of Dr. Bean that I submit a letter to the school, addressed to the school committee through Mrs. Nash. And at the beginning, Dr. Bird thought that maybe it would be in my best interest to ask for my full salary, and that Newport could possibly pay for my replacement. And because that really goes against the contract, I have a responsibility to uphold the contract between Newport Public Schools and the Teachers Association of Newport, being a member of TAN. And so I looked carefully in the contract, and I thought it would be best to follow protocol and, in my own best interest, ask for a sabbatical, which is the language in the contract. The biggest concern that I had in asking for a sabbatical was that the requirement of the stipulation of giving the district back 2 years after teaching 1 year is a lot to ask for a young black man with opportunities that could be abounding once I finish the PhD. But I do have a responsibility to follow the contract, so if I am granted the opportunity to teach at the university on a sabbatical basis, I will uphold returning to Newport Public Schools for the 2-year requirement. I do hope that the school committee and the superintendent would, though this is not in the contract, make it clear to me that it would not necessarily be required for me to return to my classroom, but perhaps some other district employment opportunity once I finish the sabbatical and return to Newport.
I think the contract the language in the policy states in service to the district.
That's correct.
Okay.
I just wanted to throw that out there because sometimes, go back where you were, and I just wanted to make sure.
I have no problem with with granting the sabbatical as long as we're not setting precedent.
And that's why
This way, we are not setting precedent.
I don't disagree.
We have allowed late applications to go forward in
Mm-hmm.
the past, where it's for the benefit of the teacher and the benefit of the district.
I do think it's a great benefit of this district to have its only black teacher at the middle school representing this district at one of our state universities. I think it's very good for Newport, and I would represent you well.
Mr. Chair, I have a question. If, upon Mr. Brown's return, the second year, first year would be classroom, right?
Not necessarily.
Okay. So what would happen? Would the district have to create another position?
No. May I, Mrs. Sylvia? I would return to Newport Public Schools. My job, which is currently grade 7 social studies at Thompson, would be open. If something else for which I was also qualified were also open, I could also apply for said position. Is that right?
As long as you're in service to the district.
As long as I'm in service of the district, which is the language of the contract that Mrs. Gaines just spoke of.
So it would have to be something existing, or
No,
I don't know.
In service to.
In service to the district, that would be, I mean, if the district created something that I would qualify for, because then I will have a PhD. If there was something that the district either created or that existed that was vacant, I could apply for that job. But basically, I'm returning to the job that I left, which is grade 7 social studies at Thompson.
so if there were no vacancies,
That's correct.
you would, the 2 years in the classroom.
I wouldn't say 2 years. I would return to my job in September 2019, pending the availability of something else I'd like to do in the district.
In the district, okay,
Yeah. The point is, I have to return to the district. That's a stipulation in the contract.
right.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Collins.
Mr. Browner, I thank you very much for that detailed explanation.
Certainly.
The reason I asked you the question was I wanted you, if I'm correct, to explain to the members who already know and
Sure.
the public that the University of Rhode Island is offering to pay for a qualified individual to take your job for a year. So it will not cost the district. It will be compliments of the University of Rhode Island, if I read the letter correctly.
That was originally correct, but because of because of the contract, I have to take a sabbatical, so that's no longer.
Okay.
Superintendent looks as if she has something she'd like to say.
I don't know if we need clarification on that,
No,
but
because
that
that's
was.
off the table.
that was
It's off the
another
table.
item As far as I'm
Okay.
concerned, tonight we're here.
It's a moot point.
Sabbatical for Mr. Browner for the 2019,
I-
18-19 school year.
I just do need clarification. Mr. Browner,
Yes,
if there is no other opportunity except the classroom.
I would return to my classroom.
Okay, thank you.
I thought that was clear. I thought I said that.
That's what I needed clarification for.
Well,
Thank
I have
you.
to have a job, so yes, I
I
would.
hope so, yes, I agree.
Thank you. Dr. Flowers.
Are there any further questions of me at this time?
Yes.
Dr. Flowers.
This is a thought, just a thought. Now, a while ago, we went through some discussion about, and I'm putting this in quotes, creating, positions. So let's say you get through the program, and congratulations on your effort.
Thank you, Dr. Flowers.
I can empathize, believe
I
me.
appreciate it.
But you come in and you are of service to the school system. If you're not in your regular classroom, and we say, well, you never know what's going to rise. You never know what's going to happen, that we can use a person with your talents and skills in something other than the classroom. So that would mean you still have to have someone teaching social studies, whatever department, whatever section you have.
Mhm.
There is a possibility then that you could be an extra person on the staff.
You mean when I return to Newport?
Yeah.
Well,
Well, if you say, I really can't take the full time in my classroom and I'm teaching at, are you envisioning teaching at UNI?
no. At the end of the sabbatical, which would be at the end of the 2018-2019 school year, I would, without question, because of my contract, return to the city of Newport, to Newport Public Schools,
Solely as that.
solely as a person returning to his job.
Right.
Now, at that time, if there was something for which I was more qualified that was open that I could apply for, and I were hired for that job, I could take it. If there was nothing that was open that I qualified for or that I desired to do, then I would return to the job that I left vacant. I hope that's clear. Okay.
It is
I
clear.
move the question.
Okay. No, if there's no other discussion, the motion has been made and seconded to approve a sabbatical per the TAN contract with the Newport School Department for Mr. Browner for the 18-19 school year.
Okay.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Okay.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you. I wish to thank Superintendent Germain, Assistant Superintendent Bean, and the members of the school committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Congratulations.
Good luck. Congratulations.
Good luck and congratulations.
Next item on the agenda is item number 6, correspondence. We have one correspondence. It's a thank you note from Jane Lees, who represented the student body at Rogers High School for last year. She was one of the members of the Rogers High School. She sent a thank you note, brief note, says, "Thank you, Newport School Committee. Thank you so much for the generous gift. I really enjoyed speaking at your meetings this year. I feel that I have grown as a public speaker. Thank you very much. Sincerely, Jane Lees." That's it. Yes, very nice. That's it on correspondence. Next item is number 7, reports from superintendent and staff. And the first one is 7.1, which would be the expenditure report.
Mr. Chairman,
The revenue report. Mr. Collins.
I move to accept all items from agenda item 7.
Second?
Motion to accept number 7, reports from superintendent and staff as reported, has been made and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Item 7. 8 is, next item on the agenda is number 8, which is suggested meeting dates and agenda items. I need to catch up. So on that, we have future meetings. We have Monday, September 10th in the Newport School Committee City Council Liaison Meeting, Newport Public Library, 1 p.m. And Monday, September 17th, Newport School Committee, regular school committee meeting here at Pell School at 6:30. It's Monday. September was the one that was moved, I believe, due to the Jewish holiday.
Yes,
and,
that's right.
Yom Kippur, I believe, in September. So it was moved to Monday, September 17th. And then Tuesday, October 9th would be the next regularly scheduled school committee meeting back here at Pell. That's our school committee and agenda items. And at this time, we're on to item number 9, executive session. I believe we have items to move into executive session.
Mr. Chair,
Mrs. Sylvia.
I move that the school committee recess and convene in executive session.
Under jurisdiction of Rhode Island State Law, Chapter 46, 42, 46.5, exceptions A1, any discussions of the job performance, character, or physical or mental health of a person or persons provided such persons affected shall have been notified in advance in writing and advised that they may require that the discussion be held at an open meeting, or A2, sections pertaining to collective bargaining or litigation, or work sections pertaining to collective bargaining or litigation.
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? We'll now move into executive session. This portion of the meeting is adjourned. That's it.
Public comment at the end? That was on the agenda, I believe. I just didn't know if that was still possible.
I didn't have